The Wisconsin Paper Council is the premier trade association which advocates for Wisconsin's paper, pulp, and forestry industries before state and federal elected officials and regulators. The WPC also works to educate the general public and the media about the importance of pulp, paper, and forestry production in Wisconsin and throughout the Midwest.
Welcome to our episode of the Wisconsin Paper Council's podcast, The Paper Files, where we explore the pulp and paper industry here in Wisconsin. I'm Michaela Chafin, Communications and Development Analyst here at WPC, and joining me today to discuss performance pallets and a little bit about the pallet industry is Rick, Materials Manager at Performance. Thank you for joining me today, and I would love to start off by hearing an overview of what Performance does and what your role in the company is.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be on and finally connect. So Performance Pallet, it started in 1981. Jim, our current owner, and his father Jerry noticed the need for pallets in the immediate area of where they grew up, Seymour, Wisconsin. 1983, Jim bought his father out of it and took over sole ownership, and it's been that way ever since. So 42 years going strong now. As of today, we produce right around 3 million-ish new pallets and reconditioned pallets. Our reconditioned pallets are just recycled pallets that we take in from customers and reuse. We also have a firewood side where we do cut and split, kiln dried packaged firewood. We have a sawmill up in Michigan, up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. We also operate 35 trucks and right around 350 trailers.
Oh, that's pretty expansive. And I know when I first reached out to you and coming on the podcast, you said you weren't sure how many people would be interested in hearing about the pallet industry. And I do think that pallets are one of those items that are in use every day and in many different ways, but people don't often think of them. And I found this fun fact on jbpallets.com that Americans use more pallets than they eat peanut butter. With nearly 2 billion pounds of peanut butter and other peanut products being consumed every year, there are more than 2 billion wooden pallets in service every day across the country. So it's definitely an unsung hero of the forest products industry. But I did want to start off with kind of simple questions to get listeners familiar with the topic before we dive in. Many of us have probably seen a pallet in a grocery store or places like Costco, but what are the ways that customers use your pallets that people outside of the industry might not think of?
The Pinterest people who use them for couches and stuff outside. Our main customers and pretty much everybody in the state of Wisconsin is pharmaceuticals, food grade companies, your cheese plants and dairy products, your clothes, your shoes, automotive parts, machining parts, all the way up to basketball courts from that are coming from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan are moved on pallets to their final destination. So it's used in almost every single industry inside the United States. It's kind of a cliche thing that we use inside the industry is that pallets move the world, and it's kind of true.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned the Pinterest people. I was asking family and friends and coworkers if they, had any burning questions about the pallet industry, and a lot of them mentioned, how do they feel about pallets being used for upcycling and being turned into furniture and things like that.
It doesn't hurt our feelings at all. We are pretty, the pallet industry is relatively green as it is, because even if a pallet does, the very few pallets that end up in a landfill, we can take solace and know that that's going to completely biodegrade back into the soil. So what if they want to build their couches and their beds and stuff, have at it. Put some pallet boards on your wall. I'll sell you some lumber.
Yeah. Well, how have customers changed their expectations in pallets over the year with sustainability being on their minds? Is sustainability a factor when winning over a customer?
Some are. It's becoming. I don't know if it. I've been with the company now 10 years. I don't know that it's been in the forefront of people's minds for the last 10 years, but it started to, I'd say within the last year and a half, it started to pick up a lot of steam. So what we do at our sawmill is all of our suppliers, all the wood has to come from sustainably managed forest. And it comes with a trip ticket from the log truck when it comes to our sawmill, just to prove that they are, take account of what they are harvesting off the land, stuff like that. And then that trickles on down the line to our manufacturing facility in Seymour. But it's, we got a couple of them that require, a couple of copies of the trip tickets just to prove, but it's not really, I don't think it's really as notable in the pallet industry as it would be in like the grade lumber industry, and things of that nature, probably in the pulp and paper industry as well.
Yeah, and you kind of touched on it in your answer, but what is the full life cycle of a pallet, coming from the forests and then eventually either getting recycled or the end of the pallet's life?
The industry standard life cycle for a pallet is right around 3 to 5 years, somewhere in there. It obviously comes from the forest if we're talking wooden pallets, because those are king in the pallet industry. So it comes from the tree. We don't purchase a saw log or pulpwood. It's right in between. We purchase the bolt wood, which is in between the pulp sticks and then the saw logs underneath. And from there it goes to our sawmill, and then it gets cut into stringers and boards, and then it'll be bundled up, sent on a truck down to us, where we put them either, depending on what the customer's looking for. We'll manufacture on one of our automated nailing machines, or a hand built process if it's a specialty item. And then from there it leaves our dock door into our customer, and from our customer to the end of its life cycle is typically about 3 to 5 years.
So you mentioned that wood is the king of pallets, and previously, before researching pallets, I didn't know that there were metal pallets or plastic pallets. I didn't know about corrugated pallets, but what makes wood the most popular material, and what are the benefits of wood over those other materials?
The main benefit of a wooden pallet is that is one of the also the common misconceptions with the wood pallet industry is some people don't really think it's very eco-friendly, but it's one of the most eco-friendly options you have. I mean, it literally, if you just throw it on the ground and let it sit, it's just gonna decay back into the earth. So as of right now, the last numbers I heard, upwards of 90% of all pallets in the world are wooden pallets. The plastic pallets, the metal pallets, we take some in on customers like source trucks when we're taking in their recyclable materials, and we just send them back to whoever they belong to. Other than that, we really don't see much. I mean, even I know like Costco, if it was Costco and one other big store, we're trying to make a push for plastic pallets. I don't know the reason behind it, because they're not. I mean, the wooden pallets are much more cost effective. They're much more affordable for a customer as opposed to a plastic pallet. They're so diverse. You can cut any length you want. We can make a customer a 160-inch pallet if they need it, down to a 6-inch pallet if they need it. So I just think they're much easier to work with. I don't know. Maybe I'm just partial to wooden pallets.
Yeah, and that's you mentioned you can sort of do them in a bunch of shapes, different designs, and that's another question that I got from people that I know, which I'll consider the general public's opinion. What is the difference between the different forms of pallets? I noticed that some have slats on the top, whereas others are basically a solid closed board surface. Is there a benefit between, having the gaps on top versus closed board?
I think it's just really a customer preference, how it runs inside of their facility. Some require, flush tops just because that's how their product sits, and they don't want it rocking back and forth on top of the pallet. we got design systems so we can design any kind of pallet that we need to for our customers. Yeah, I think mainly it's just customer preference. However they want their pallet, we'll build it for them.
And during the COVID pandemic, there was a large uptick in the amount of items shipped from online businesses like Amazon, and the packaging industry certainly saw the effects of that. But what changes, if any, have you noticed since COVID in the pallet market?
I think the biggest one was employees come by. I think it's forcing a lot of automation in our industry, which isn't all that bad. But that was probably the biggest thing that we noticed. Also, and everybody felt this effect was the supply chain issues. The lack of trucking, the lack of available, in our industry, lack of available wood, because everything was just going gangbusters for 2.5 years.
How would you say that's getting back to normal? Are places like Performance coming up with solutions that sort of fix those problems?
We're pretty successful. We have a good customer base, and we're lucky enough to be vertically integrated into having a sawmill all the way down to the trucking industry, to where we really didn't feel as much pain of the lack of wood on the open market as some others might have. So that's probably one of the biggest changes you're starting to see in our industry is other pallet manufacturers looking to vertically integrate and purchasing a sawmill or starting a sawmill so they can more so control that supply chain side of it.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for joining the podcast and talking about Performance in the pallet industry. Is there anything that you'd like to shout out at your website?
If anybody out there listening is in the need for pallets, just go visit us at performance-corp.com. Fill out the form. Like I said, we've been family owned and operated for 42 years now. Great group of people to work with. And give us a call if you need anything. And I appreciate your time. I know there's not many people out there that are probably too interested in the pallet industry, but it is vital to our forest products. A lot of people in this state that, just in our pallet industry that heavily rely on the forest industry. And it keeps us moving.
That's very true. Well, thank you, Rick, and thank you for listening to our podcast.
Thank you for listening. For more information on the paper industry or the Wisconsin Paper Council, please visit www.wipaper.org. WPC members have access to special events, newsletters, committees, and more.